If you're like me and you've got way too many samples and presets, today I want to show you how you can clean them out, get organized, all so you can be creating more music more frequently without getting distracted. Today's video is actually going to be a lesson taken from my Producer Launchpad program, where I help music producers just like you bring their music up to a professional quality in just 12 weeks. So if you want to learn more about it, link is in the description, and let's dive in. Now, in my 14 years of music production, I've been in situations where I've both been really organized and had no organizational system whatsoever. And both are bad. And here's why. When there was no organization, I was always struggling to find the sounds and resources that I needed to make the music I wanted to. Without that structure, I was always searching in random folders, never quite knew where the sounds I wanted were. I would just kind of chuck things on my desktop or whatever. But when I've had too much organization, and that kind of came as the counter, the pendulum swing after that, I was way over organized. I was kind of nerding out about the organizational side of things, where I had the systems in place and I had no problem finding things, but the system itself was so hard to maintain. I spent more time maintaining the system than I did actually making music. And you don't want to build a rod for your own back, so to speak. And so that's why I'm talking about messy systems today, because I think that's the crux of this balance between these two extremes. But before we create messy systems, we have to go through a process which I like to call a studio spring clean, right? So like you spring clean your home every year in spring. You don't have to wait to spring to do this. It's just for the analogy, right? If you have too many resources, you need to do this. And a lot of us, especially whether even we're beginners, intermediates, or advanced, no matter where we are, we accumulate resources, especially early on, because we think having lots of resources is the answer. And so this is a necessary step. If you find you've got too many resources, you need to do this first. And it's a really simple process. So I'm going to quickly run through this. It should take you no longer than 30 to 60 minutes to do this. And obviously, the less you have, the quicker it will be. First, you need to go into your DAW or your folders and create an archive folder. Now, I'm going to show this in my Finder really quick. So this is in my Ableton user library. Again, this has to be in your DAW's. Ideally, it's inside your DAW's kind of default directory where it searches for samples and stuff, because this is the easiest way to make things still work while being organized. Now, the archive folder is where you're going to put anything you're no longer relying on or using in your default library. Now, the reason we do this instead of deleting it is because if old projects reference anything, we've still got copies of it. So it's kind of like deleting. It's like in Gmail, if instead of deleting something, you can archive it, right? Similar concept. So create that folder. I like to put an exclamation mark so it's kind of at the top or whatever. Once you've done that, go to your user library or wherever you've got your current samples. Maybe yours isn't organized like mine. Wherever your samples, MIDI, presets, whatever it is, and put them inside this archive folder. I've got a bunch of packs in here that I no longer use that I might need to reference later, but they're there, right? And so you want to check anything and everything in here that doesn't fit that bill. With the exception of projects. I mean, you can put projects in here, but I like to do something different. And then once you've done this, you might be wondering, but some of the stuff, in some of those packs that I'm getting rid of, there might be a little bit of stuff. Now, if you know the samples maybe from a certain pack that you like to gravitate towards, now's your time to just quickly run through them. Like, let's say there's some, in some of my D&B packs, there's a few sounds I like, right? Maybe there's a few sounds there I would have liked to have, kept. I can grab those out of these folders and move them into a new folder or something like that, right? So if you know there are packs like that, you can do that. Go through and figure out which ones they are. The reason I like this is because it's a bottom-up approach. You're getting rid of everything by default and only getting out the things you like, rather than having to go through every single pack and delete stuff one by one. You're simply just skimming through and grabbing out a few things and then forsaking the rest, really. And so this is so important because it's going to be a really quick process, one, but also two, sometimes you just need a ground zero. Sometimes you just need to go back to basics and start from scratch. Even if it means you're like re-downloading the same packs or something like that, and you're just kind of copying them over into a new folder, right? I highly recommend doing this. And so basically everything will just go into your archive folder, and then you will have a clean slate to kind of filling up your main in-use samples, MIDI presets, whatever, right? So this is the simplest form of a Studio Spring clean I could think of. And I think, again, the bottom-up approach. Build up a library from the bottom up rather than trying to just like get rid of a few packs here and there, because that's just going to take too much time. You can use the top-down approach. Like, for example, maybe you've just got a few too many packs. You can just quickly delete the ones that you have that you're not going to use, or put them aside into the archive folder, and then kind of quickly move on. If that's going to take you like max 5 minutes, that's fine. And so that's a Studio Spring clean. Really simple way just to get to a ground zero, right? Now we're going to talk about how to organize the stuff you do want to keep. Now, part of this, I will mention, maybe you need to go ahead and find some new sounds. Maybe you need to download a few packs. Maybe you need to pay for new packs. At this point, I highly recommend doing that. And we'll talk a bit about this more in the sound selection week, which I think is in 2 weeks from now. But I'm assuming there's already some sounds that you've got that you want to keep in your default library. So this is where we're going to organize them now in Messy Systems. So let's talk projects first. Now, I have my projects folder in the side of Ableton here. In Ableton, if those of you who aren't using Ableton, you can actually open up projects from the browser, which is pretty cool. I have a few different folders here, and I'll quickly run through them. Now, my first folder is my ideas folder. Any song idea I start goes in here. You can see I've got probably over 100 in here. Occasionally I'll go through and organize these. But this is where anything that I'm not currently working on that's just an idea, an in-progress thing exists. Now, as much as I'd like to say I'm the perfect producer and I finish everything I start, I don't. I generate a lot of ideas, but the ones that I think are worth committing to, I will try and finish, right? And when I do say I'm going to finish something, I do. And so that's the default folder everything goes into, right? Any song ideas. In progress is the song I've decided, and this sometimes might be more than one, but I'm really trying to stick to one at the moment because I think, again, simple is the best. This will contain one project, and some people, instead of doing this, they just put their in progress on the desktop, which is another approach too, right? I've experimented with that where you simply just put the in progress folder, or maybe not even the folder, just the exact project onto your desktop, because that's kind of like, hey, this is the in progress one, right? So that's an approach too. I like to have it in a folder. So this Submergence project is something I'm currently working on. By the way, one thing I do which I really like is I actually export the current version in that folder so I can listen to it without having to open the project. Pretty cool. And then folder 3 here is for any finished songs. These numbers are optional, by the way. I just like to have them numbered so I can see the logical progression from ideas to finish to released. Finished is for any songs that have been finished that aren't currently released. Now, a few of these actually have to go in to release at the moment. I haven't cleaned this up recently, but generally speaking, that's where they exist. And so then in released, this is the only one I've organized by year. I don't bother doing this with any of the others. Again, Messy Systems, right? You want the simplest systems possible. The only reason I have these organized by year is because I like to kind of know, oh yeah, that was released in 2021, 2022. Got to still make my 2023 folder and move things from finished. And so that's the general gist of things, right? You can follow these roughly or specifically. I think having some sort of separation between the stages of projects is the crux of what my Messy system is here, right? So do that. And then I have other projects for fun things, little like jams, or maybe like for me, I'm using these for a lot of my EDMProd tutorials and stuff like that. You can see there's tutorial stuff in here. So for any miscellaneous type projects, I just have kind of a dump there. Honestly, it's it's unorganized, but it's a messy system. Now, I will really quickly drop some videos for setting up templates. Speaking of projects, everyone's going to have a different template. I do think the general principle of a template should be that it's simple. I try not to load too much into it to reduce the load speed. And I try not to load it up with too many plugins. I prefer to use things like racks and channel strips that are kind of pre-saved that I can bring on to certain instruments when necessary. So my advice with templates is simply simplest thing possible. It's going to point you in the right direction. The one thing I do have it in here is sends and returns, because that's really straightforward and I pretty much always use them. But yeah, simplest possible template that's going to point you in the right direction. I have some structure in my template here for my song structure, which if you're looking at the Ultimate Genre Toolkit, the templates there will have a similar structure too, which is pretty cool for the different genres. But yeah, all these are audio tracks, you know, or MIDI tracks that are blank, that is colored and stuff like that. So I know, like, these are the default instruments that are pretty much going to be in every single track. I don't put anything in the project, my template, that I know is not going to be in every track. Every track's going to have a kick, snare, hat, and break, a sub, a vocal, probably, sample, an instrument, and then some effects that I pretty much always use. So I have them in my project. I don't put fancy gorilla sound in my project because I might use a gorilla sound in one of my projects. I just make a track because that's a very track specific thing, right? So that's how I approach templates. Now, samples. Samples is probably the biggest one here. This is where a lot of your time is going to be spent organizing. Again, though, simple, messy system. One master folder for all your samples. That's what I've got. Now, as you can see here, I have tried to organize. You can organize one of two ways, by pack or by sound type. Now, this is a weird mess of both. I actually am going back to the pack type because I think it's just the easiest and it's the simplest. I think organizing by like type of sound is great, but again, it takes too much time to organize. That's why you'll see me just kind of dragging in sample packs amongst things that say, oh, this is all my string samples, right? These are all my saxophone samples, right? So I much prefer to, any packs you download, put them in the top level folder because, you know, that pack may have a very specific use case. Now, I've done a 2023 folder here. I'm kind of in the progress of considering moving some of these to archive and kind of selecting out and really simplifying this even further. So if you've already got a samples folder and you're kind of going through wanting to do the top-down approach as opposed to the bottom-up approach, you can just drag a few of the favorite kits in here and stuff like that. But yeah, like even here, I kind of tried to start doing it by type and it just hasn't worked. So I'm probably just going to do it by kit now, right? The only exception here is if you're using Splice or Loop Cloud, which kind of you download individual kits. But what I actually do, as you would have seen here, is when I'm downloading, say, some samples off Loop Cloud, I actually create my own sample pack for that batch of samples. For example, if I'll batch it by month and I'll download all the samples I downloaded from Loop Cloud in April, and then I'll put them in one folder. So I got all those sounds, right? It's like I'm creating my own sample packs from those services. So that's how I like to think about it, right? Now, obviously, Splice creates its own folder. Unfortunately, it won't kind of change depending on where you want to point it to. It's just got its own folder. It's in its own folder in a separate place on your hard drive. You can't really change it. So I do put my Splice packs folder in my sidebar here just because I know there's certain samples that I'm going to want to access from Splice. I also do use the Splice interface to do this. Same thing with Loop Cloud. You can do that. But obviously, there's slight differences in the workflow of how those samples are downloaded. In addition to this, I like to use a collections folder, or in Ableton, you've got the collections feature. If your DAW doesn't have this, highly recommend creating just a folder of your favorite samples. So obviously, you'll have your overall big sample pack library, but you can copy, paste, or even move samples to a favorites folder. And I highly recommend making the favorites folder have no more than, say, 50 samples in it. For everything, because you really want it to be curated stuff that's like the stuff you're going to use throughout a lot of your tracks that's really going to define your sound. This is common kicks, claps, snares, hats, effects, stuff that you're going to pretty much use in a majority of your tracks, right? And you kind of alternate between those sounds. Very important to create a favorites one. I kind of use it for vocal samples or melodic sounds, for bass, for drums. Sounds or presets or whatever that I'm going to use in every single track. The cool thing in Ableton, it doesn't have to be audio samples. You can also include presets in here too. I also have like a sounds folder for just cool sounds, which are like favorites in a sense, but they're more like experimental, just picking from out my favorite packs in my main sample folder, the sounds I like to use. For experimental things, maybe I'll just pull out a random experimental sound like that sometimes and see what happens. And then I also, again, put anything you're not using into the archive folder. And I also have an audition folder for new, especially free sample packs. I like to put things in here before I commit to bringing them into my sample packs. Because, for example, if I've downloaded a free pack, I'll want to go through that pack and make sure it's actually right for me. And then once you've decided it's a good pack, you can then, move that into your samples folder. And so this is why I like to kind of do that. Or maybe there's like one sample from a pack that you just want to grab that one sample and delete the rest. You can kind of bring it in on its own or something. Very cool. And that's samples, right? Really simple, but effective. Now let's talk MIDI. It's the same concept. I would just these days bring in a pack. MIDI packs, there's not many of them. Trying to organize it the way I have here, for example, like MIDI tools, downloaded MIDI files, just don't do this. This is an example of what not to do, right? So I'm going to bring this all into a top level folder. I'm actually going to delete these more organized folders because again, you'll see here, there's a few kind of, packs. There's a few like artist specific MIDIs that I've downloaded to kind of reference certain artists. But again, it's like this extra layer of organization isn't really helping me. So I'm just going to go ahead here and put it all in the top level folder. And this goes for samples too. Recreations is like stuff that I've worked on. So maybe I can put this at the top and call it artsy recreations. Cool. That's my own original MIDI. I like to do that with the exclamation mark for original stuff, by the way, really cool hack. And then original chords and melodies, I'll be artsy originals. So this is my own original MIDI, right? So apart from that, that's as organized as you need to be, in my opinion. And this is what messy systems are. So there we go. Reference tracks, one folder, put in your favorite tracks. If you make multiple different genres, which ideally you don't, again, maybe you have 2 or 3 you bounce around. That's cool. But ideally, you kind of have this one folder with all the tracks that you're going to use as a reference track in here. So that you can easily drag it into your DAW and use it as a reference track, right? Very, very helpful. Now, presets for synths are different. Always use the default preset folder for that synths presets, right? So for example, Serum is the one that most people are going to be familiar with here. I don't put it in like some presets folder in Ableton. I just put it in the, so if I go to load preset here in Serum, I just put it, I just put the folder in the presets folder. You can see here, everything's in like the top level domain, all the packs. It's like a sample pack. I just put it in here, right? Now, again, if you've like downloaded a sample pack that has presets built into it, you just move that preset folder into the preset folder of your synth. Having Serum presets in your Ableton library or your Logic library isn't going to be all that helpful because you can't load them into the synth that way anyway. So very important to note that down. Move it where your synth wants the samples or the presets rather, and they'll just show up like our EDM Essentials kit. It's there. Perfect. There we go. And so plugins. Speaking of plugins, we've opened up Serum here. I'm just going to quickly go to my folder here. What's going on with our plugins is if you go to your plugin folder on your computer, so on a Mac, that's in the library audio section, it's going to be different depending on whether you're on Windows or whatever, or if you've changed your default plugins folder. But if I go into my plugins folder, I actually put a component, so that's audio units, by the way. This is VST, and then you've got VST3, you can do it for that as well. But I actually create a VST disabled and a components disabled folder for plugins that I don't want to show up in my library, again, that I don't necessarily want to delete. If I have an old project that uses a component in here, like Core 1 I'm not currently using, I can quickly bring it back into the main components folder, and then it's there. So I can quickly load back the project, right? Really handy to, again, it's like an archive for your plugins. You could even put these plugins in your archive folder like we created before, so it's all in one place, but I just like to have it in the same directory. Makes it a bit simpler when I'm moving things back and forth. And the cool part about this is then you've got a lot simpler of a setup, right? As for organizing VSTs, I actually prefer VSTs to audio units if you're on Mac because you can create these folders and organize it that way. Audio units kind of does it by developer, which is cool. Again, it doesn't particularly matter as long as you have some sort of system. Like AU kind of goes by developer, which is cool. I have done it by typing in here. It takes 2 seconds to create the folder and move the plugin in because plugins, aren't as plentiful as samples. But again, having some basic system, whether it's even just the plugin developer's name or whatever. I think the thing with VST is when you drag it in, like these ones down here, they're just in the folder. These are all the Arturia ones I got from the Arturia V collection, right? I haven't organized these ones yet. So I would probably put them in instruments because they're instruments. But, maybe I just make an Arturia folder, right? So there's no right or wrong way
I think having something with VST, because you're not going to have the same thing where it's like a sample pack downloads and they're going to already be organized in a folder. You have to kind of create that for yourself. But that's why I prefer to use VST over AU. And then lastly, a few other last minute ones that I fit into the other category here. So this is like impulse responses for like a convolution reverb. We'll talk about that later. Remix stems. I just have like a folder in my user library. Again, I kind of just download it by pack of stems. Templates. I put in my default templates folder for Ableton. Again, most DAWs will have a default templates area. Native racks and channel strips, I save in the place where that exists by default in the audio effect rack folder or the instrument rack folder here in Ableton. And I actually add these, into my places folder on the left here, so they're easily accessible, as opposed to me having to go into the user library, going into presets, going into audio effect rack, and then finding my presets. It's just easier to have them on the side here. Really, really cool. You can do this in your DAW too as well, I believe. In any DAW, you can pretty much add the folders in, which is nice. So that's where I will put my native presets and racks. And so that is really the Messy systems across all the different areas of production resources you're going to use. If there's anything I missed, let me know. I'll happily film a little bonus video. And so first, do a Studio Spring Clean, because that's going to help simplify your workflow from the ground up. Studio Spring Clean is best done using the bottom-up approach, like I just mentioned. Top-down approach takes too long, going through individual packs and deleting the ones you don't like rather than just taking it all out and then starting from fresh. It only works if your studio setup's already fairly simple. And then organize what you do want to have, whether it's new stuff you're downloading or a few packs you've chosen, using Messy systems, right? And so again, 30 to 60 minutes, that's all it should take. Do a spring clean, and then I'd probably leave maybe 1 or 2 hours max to do the Messy systems. This is probably the most labor-intensive thing you'll do this week besides your week 1 project. So it's okay if this maybe bleeds a bit into week 2 as you kind of refine it a bit. Do it when you have a bit of spare time. Maybe add it to your production ritual as you finish a track. You spend a bit of time organizing. It doesn't have to literally all be done in one session. So feel free to break that up as well if that works better with your schedule. Great, that's it for this lesson. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Now it's your turn. Go and organize your samples and come back and let me know how you went. And if you do want to work with me one-on-one, link is in the description for all the information about my Producer Launchpad program. You can apply and let's chat about working together. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and until next time, guys, happy producing.